give my voice. I am trying to overcome sickness, and it's not getting any better. So I taught this class about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, and I have a lot of data that supports my support for my ELL students. So I'm kind of going to go over my assignment, and then you can be the judge if you believe I did a good job or not. So what we're going over is westward expansion. And what I wanted to focus on with my students is the treatment of the Native Americans and the clash of culture between white settlers and Native Americans. So the class is going to open with the students basically required and asked to look at this picture and the word and do their best to define the word. I have the opportunity to have a lot of ELL students in my classroom. And the way that I initially differentiated even the bell work was that instead of asking the kids what they believe the word meant, I actually wanted them to list and describe what the picture represents and what it reflects. So I had a lot of students, telling me that they believed this was an angel, and they were talking about how the Native Americans were running away. And a lot of the students did a great job at listing these things, and it was a great way to help them use their eyes and focus on what's going on using visual aid and representation. The class kind of kind of begins, and we go over some of the expectations, standards, and objectives that I'm required to put in my posts, and what we're kind of going over today. So I have a lot of information on here, and the majority of my students are required to actually fill out either guided notes on some days or Cornell style of notes. With my ELL students, I allow them to actually have the notes that I print out for them, and I do the same with my IEP students. And what I ask them to do is to highlight what they believe is the main points of each slide. So I have my students going over, and then what I do after the fact to make sure I can give them a grade is I provide feedback of whether they are correct about the main points or not. And as we move in throughout, all of this stuff, I want them to really focus on this slide right here. And these are excerpts from multiple books, journals, diaries, things like that, of the treatment of how Americans saw Native Americans. I really wanted the students to focus on some of the key words: the thinning of Indians. By the disease to the hand of God imminently seen. And I asked my students how that made them feel. And the hardest part in class is obviously if an ELL student doesn't necessarily feel comfortable communicating in front of the class, I want to still provide them an outlet to be able to communicate. So as we continue on and I want them to talk about certain things, I have my students go through Padlet. And so anybody that doesn't want to type or doesn't feel comfortable typing is capable to answer questions out loud in front of the class. And those that aren't are able to answer this information over Padlet. And so the students are tasked with answering the question: Americans began moving into the West, in which natives believed was their territory. What do you think was the perfect solution to the Indian problem? What I asked my ELL students during this question that I wanted them to answer was that what happens when two cultures collide, and how do you keep it from being a bad thing? And I made sure I walked around and I really hit on these students. And some of them were required to use, or not required, but some of them feel that they needed to use generators and translations and things like that. And I really have no problem with that. What I really focus on with my ELL students are I don't necessarily need them to have the perfect answer or the perfect spelling, but I want to see their attempts and I want to see their best effort forward. And the way that I, take the notes, the way that I ask the students questions, and the way that I require them to fill out, more information of Padlet really allows my students to get a good grasp of hearing the words, reading the words, seeing the words, and then trying to figure out the main, supporting topics of each thing. And as long as I provide information and provide feedback to my students, I really believe that it is getting them the idea of this. And um, What I've gotten back from my ELL students is that I provide them a lot more support than they're used to. And because of that, they usually have to do more work in my class, but they actually enjoy me and the way that I teach my class because they feel like they're actually included. As I move on through the end of this, I have data that supports kind of my help with my students. So at first, I want to show you what I asked the majority of my students to do, and then I will show you um, what one of my students who is an ELL4 did. So I have my students answering the questions in a 50-word summary to demonstrate their deeper understanding of the persecution of Native Americans. And I want them to evaluate the influence of multiple cultures on the nation. The paper should adhere to these following guidelines, and deviation from these guidelines will result in a loss of points. This 50-word summary should include a Google Doc, one quote from the lecture, which is no larger than 10 words, using the guided lecture in our Canvas page. I want them to use multiple points to summarize the mistreatment, and this is also from your guided notes. Use complete sentences, correct spelling, concise summarizing with no less than 50 words for the summary and no more than 100. The sentence stem is only 10 words long, and it does not count towards your overall word count. And you will need to use this sentence stem below to begin. And like, and I provide exemplars for all my students, and I wanted them to see kind of my expectation from a different subject on what a good 50-word summary really looks like. And then I had one of my students who, just about in every test, quiz, essay has an A in my class because of the work that he provides. And you could see uses of the way he adds in quotes. And this actually he got a B because he didn't add in any of the quotes that I wanted him to, but he did add data and information in that supported that. And so, some of the things that he communicates, you can tell that he's eloquent with his words, and he's using information provided from the slides into a summary or a short essay. Another one of my students was who was an ELL student. I gave a differentiation strategy with my students. I provided less requirements, and I allowed a little bit more leverage and leeway with how they write this. So I told the students that their requirements are 30-word summary. And I make sure I do this without other students hearing or seeing this because I don't want anybody to feel like they're less than or another student to, be in anybody else's business that they're not. I asked my students to make sure they do it on a Google Doc, and I wanted them to use one quote from the lecture. I didn't necessarily care how long it was, and I really wasn't focused too much on anything in specific. I just wanted them to know how to add a quote into it. And then because I understand that some students have a difficult time putting everything into a sentence, I allowed them to list as many reasons why the different cultures fight. And then I wanted them to use the sentence stem below as well. I provided the same exemplar with the students, and we went over this exemplar as a class. And I was really impressed with one of my students. She usually averages in the B/C range because she puts her best foot forward. But she's classified as an ELL student and spends 2 hours a day in an ELL immersion class. And you can tell that the way she writes, she's using the way she communicates and the way she writes. Sometimes misspelling words, improper grammar, things like that. But I was really impressed with the way that she added the information. She hit the main ideas, and she was really supporting a lot of the topics. And she added in the quote that I was really happy about because I think this shows just how ugly and negative the conversation really was. And so when it's all said and done, and using the differentiation strategies and the way that I assign this, I actually gave her an A in this assignment. So hopefully, hopefully this shows that the class that I learned and everything that this ELL class has provided has really helped benefit me in my classroom, and it gave me an extra look into what I really need to do moving forward.